Let's start. So hello everybody who is here with me today. My name is Mike Campbell. I am one of the assistants in the Center for Creativity at the University of Pittsburgh. Today we're going to do a nature print workshop. If you have any questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat. If I don't see them, I also have another Center for Creativity assistant, Jasmine, here, who will help relay questions and answer any questions that she can in the chat. If you've never done any sort of prints before, I will tell you a little bit about what these materials are, what we're going to do with them, and what I mean by nature prints. So as you can see, there is a pile of leaves here, and that is what we will use as our nature. So we are going to be using what is referred to as a gel plate, or commercially they're called jelly plates. And these are used to make monoprints. So monoprint is a type of printmaking that each print is unique. So typical printmaking processes, you think about producing multiple copies of something. You set something up in a way that whenever you print it, you get to do it over and over again, and it's not different material. Whereas this, when we're using these types of plates, you can get one print from those, maybe two, and I'll show you that as we go. But every time you do a print with these, they will be unique, and you won't be able to get multiple pages of the same print. And what makes it a print versus just a painting is that we are transferring it from these plates to a piece of paper. You will have to give up some control for this process. This is a very process-oriented workshop. There are no mistakes that you can make. It is very much about just playing around, having fun, seeing what you like to do, and there is no wrong way to do that. I'm going to talk about material first here, and most importantly, we're going to start with the plates. So this is a commercial plate. It is called a jelly plate, G-E-L-L-I. It is a plastic plate. There is no sort of food materials in it, which is what this plate will be. You can buy these on Amazon or in a craft store like Michael's for $10 to $15. There's not much difference in size. They're sort of like this size and a slightly larger size that I think is 9 by 13. So this is typically what you would buy, and you would use printmaking ink for this. You can use paint, but as I will explain, it's a little tricky, whereas this is a homemade plate. This is a plate using gelatin and glycerin, and there is a video we made that you can find online how to make this exact plate. There are several different ways to make these types of plates. So gelatin and glycerin is a plasticizer, so it will make this shelf stable for as long as it lasts. You can use just gelatin, but it will need to be refrigerated and it won't last that long. You can also use plant-based alternatives. So I did try to make it with carrageenan, which is an algae alternative. It didn't turn out so well. I couldn't locate a recipe when I made that one at first. Since then, I have found one that uses agar as the main ingredient, agar and glycerin. So it is possible to make this using a vegetable alternative, but I have not done so. You'll have to find exact recipes online. Hopefully you'll be able to find something and get a similar texture. This I'll give you sort of the benefits to each of the plates. So this one's a commercial plate, of course. You'll be able to buy block print ink and know that it'll work on this because this is made to be used with block printing ink. This plate, depending on what you use to make it with, will have a little bit of a difference in what can be used on it. So I found, as I will show you, at least for what I like, that liquid paints work a little better. And why is it yellow? So I used beef gelatin because it was a little cheaper, and beef gelatin has more of a yellow color, whereas just like the gelatin you buy in stores is pork gelatin, so it's a little lighter. You will have a color, so that's one of the, if you want it to be transparent, that is one of the negatives too. That doesn't bother me too much, but if you were trying to, I don't know, use an outline underneath that you'd want to use. This one, you will have to find something to store it in. So this comes with a plastic shell that it fits perfectly in. So of course, you don't have to worry about how to store it. This one, you have to find a container that fits whatever you put it in. And you want to make sure that whatever you're storing it in a flat, so like a flat sheet of plastic, or a Tupperware container that is flat, because it will imprint over time the texture of it. The first time I made one of these, I put plastic wrap over top of it, and it got a whole bunch of wavy lines from the plastic wrap. And insects shouldn't bother it. And so temperature will remelt it. I don't know if the sun would remelt it per se. It will. I think that, I mean, if you're putting it in your car, just in general being outside, I don't think it'll get hot enough for it to melt that way. And as for pre-treatments to prevent the discoloration, not that I know of. Everything just sort of had the same recipes on them. Making your own's a little cheaper. You can buy glycerin and gelatin in any supermarket or drugstore, like Walmart, Target. Generally, glycerin's in the beauty aisle. You can use it to make soap. People use it for moisturizer. And then gelatin, of course, is in food products. So something else that is different between the two is cleanup. So this, as you go, you can spray it with water. So I have a water bottle and just a rag and a sponge beside me. You can do that for both of them, but if you let something stick like this, you can take and put underwater and things will rub off of it. That's fine. With this, it does get slimy almost. It does absorb water still. It does slowly dry out over time. So like that is one of the reasons that you want to put this in a container, because it will slowly dry out over time. And whenever you put water on it, it will, absorb some of that water and get a little slick on the surface, which, at least for me, is a downside to this plate. It was not the most fun to clean under a sink. But with that said, this is remeltable. So say, for example, there is a tear in the back of mine. Doesn't bother me right now, could grow over time. I can easily just melt this down in the pot and reshape it. So if I wanted to make a bigger plate or make a different size plate, that is one of the benefits. And one of the downsides to that, though, is that any color that you did not clean off of it, will then be embedded in your plate. And then the last thing is just the difference in tolerance. So this is a little more sturdy. Like I can stretch this a little bit, and I know it's not just going to rip on me. As I already showed you, this has a nice tear on the bottom. If I pull this too much, like it has some give to it. It had a little more when I first made it, but I've had this one for about a month and a half now. It's a little more sensitive, and it can tear a little easier. But it still has like enough give, at least on the side that's not ripped, that I'm not like too concerned that it's just going to fall apart on me. Yeah, so that is one of the other reasons that you'd want to make the homemade plate. This is a plastic, and even though glycerin is a plasticizer, it is not plastic. So this one is more eco-friendly than the commercial plate that you can buy. And as for the thickness of the plate, just thick enough that you are comfortable with using it. So like this is thin again, so it's stronger, not as bad. This was my third plate I made. So I was still a little scared. So I made mine pretty thick, but it doesn't have to be this thick. If you're fine with, testing around a few times to find a thickness you like, you can make it thinner. Also, it's based on the container size you have. So whenever you pour this, you do need to pour it into something that is tolerant of heat. So a baking tray is normally what you would pour it into. So you just want to make sure you have enough material to fill a baking tray, because with the volume that I used, there was enough for the small, brownie tray I had, but there wasn't enough for a big sheet tray. If I would have doubled the recipe, I could have made a thinner one that would have fit in my sheet tray. Pretty much, like if it's this thin or thicker, it's good enough. If you do it too thin, it will break easily. So like if you're making a huge plate, you'll probably want to make it a little thicker, just so you don't have to worry about it accidentally breaking when you're transporting it, Whereas this, I could have made this probably half the thickness. And because it's so small, it probably would not have changed the durability anymore. Now we'll move on to paints and inks. Again, depending on what inks you're using, there are some experiments. Again, commercial plate, ink. homemade plate, you could try ink, but I experimented with different thicknesses of paint for this. And what I will say is, and this goes with the what you prefer. If you use paint on this plate, on the commercial plate, it will be very streaky and harder to control. If you like that, then that's fine. If not, I would say go with this plate. This plate's a little more tolerant of all types of paint. So like thicker paint you can kind of get away with. Here is just an artist's acrylic paint. So this is a little bit of a thicker acrylic paint. And while I'm doing this, I'll also talk about tools. So there are typically 3 types of tools that you can use. You can use anything as long as it's not sharp, but a brayer, which is what you would use for typical printmaking, a palette knife, and then a brush. So the brush will give you the strokes of the brush. They will be very visible with this process. Palette knife, depending on which one you're using, could make more strokes. This is going to give you your most even coverage, which again, it's very much what you prefer. So I will just demonstrate on each of these so you can see what I mean. So thicker paints, again, it kind of works on the commercial plate, but you can still see that there's some spots that are just harder to get fully covered. And then if you work with it too much, it will easily roll right off. So like this line here, it was inked on and now it's coming off. So yeah, see, that's already like too short of a time to sit on there. Whereas this is more tolerant of most types of paint. So it does have the tendency to come off. When it does that, again, this seems to work better with slightly thinner paints. You can just use some water. You can also pre-mix the paint to be more wet than spraying the plate itself. But you can't do quite the same thing here because it still just rolls away. So again, this seems to be more tolerant of all types of paint and different stuff. So palette knife, again.
Hey, Mike, we do have a question in chat. The question is, do you ever use medium to promote flow of paint?
So I haven't done that with this, but yeah, so you can play around with mediums if you want. Again, thinner mediums are probably better. I don't know if thickening mediums would help too much. So you can kind of use thicker paints with the palette knife and then paintbrush. So the paintbrush is not my favorite because it does tend to be very streaky on both plates. But if you want a streaky plate when you print, then that's fine. But it is, at least in my opinion, a lot more noticeable on the commercial plate. So that is the strokes. This is from the palette knife, and this is from the brayer. And that is from the paintbrush, so it just thinned it out a lot. And it has some of the strokes, they're just not as noticeable. There's not every stroke. You can just see the broad strokes of the stroke. Palette knife and the brayer. So you don't want to take too long to put all of your lengths on. So if I tried to print now, I'll show you what happens. These are already all kind of pretty dry. Yeah, so not much came off there. This one, because it's not absorbing the liquid, might print a little longer or have a little longer until the inks dry out or the paints dry out. Yeah, so if you plan on doing something super detailed, you might have to deal with the tolerance of the commercial plate because it will let you apply paints a little longer. And again, we're using a thicker paint. That's why I do prefer the more watery paints that I will show you here.
We do have another question in chat, Mike. The question is, do the acrylics dye the plate on the long run?
No, not really. As long as, so if you were just using gelatin, maybe, I don't know if that would make it more absorbable. The month and a half that I've been playing with this jelly plate, it doesn't really seem to absorb colors. Of course, other than the natural color of.
And then we have one more question. Do you dampen the paper to help?
So that I have not used damp paper. That is something that might be able to help lift off some of the drier material. That's not my preference. I prefer the medium to be more liquid. Again, this is all about the process, so it is possible for you to really play around. And if you want to try to moisten the paper and try and use this drier medium, you can. I know these are all very vague, but that's kind of the the point of this medium, is that it's very flexible in what you do with it, depending on what you're trying to get out of it. And as you can see, this one is a little more laborious to clean as well. I'm going to show you ink, and you're just going to have to believe me on the liquid paint not sticking to this plate at all, because I don't want to take too long to show you. So we can get to the fun nature part of it. Homemade plate kind of does what this plate did with the thicker paint, in that there are some blank splotches that I can never quite seem to get completely filled. And to give it a fair chance, I'm going to pull the print right away. So you can use ink with this plate. It does work decently. It's not as even as it should be, but it does work.
Hi, Mike. We do have another question in chat. The question is, does the cloth just have water on it or also some weak soap solution to help it clean?
So I'm just using water right now. You can use soap as well, but I don't want to chance there being suds still on the plates. Okay, so I have not tested out this ink, and I've only used the ink I have at home so far until today. It does not seem that this ink is spreading very evenly either. So yeah, so this is not evening out as nicely as I would like it to. And again, I have been practicing for this workshop off campus, so I've been using slightly different materials. Yeah, so that's not as even as I would like it to be either. So that's one of the reasons so far I just don't like this block as well as I like the homemade one. So when I say more liquid paint, I'm going to say that like, whenever you buy a paint at the store, there are 3 or 4 different kinds of paints you're using. So there's your artist paint. These are going to be a little thicker, have a little more of the pigments in them. For people that don't know this, you'll have the economy paints, which are more pigmented, more thick than a craft paint, but they're still not as pigmented or as nice and thick as an artist paint. And then you have student paints, which for me they vary. So like we use Blick paints, and I find that the economy and the student grade paints are about the same, in my opinion. Maybe the economy are even a little nicer, but the student grade paints I used were a little nicer than the economy paints, and that was from a different brand. And then you have craft paints. So these are the paints you just see in those little jars that we, like these. So these are craft paints. I don't know, but this is probably a craft paint. They're not as pigmented. They're normally in fun colors. They don't have quite the same name scheme as an actual paint has. So this is melted chocolate and not like some sort of sienna, which is what this might be. I don't know. So I find that if you are doing this at home, you don't want to put too much money into it. This plate is really good because you can use craft paints. You can use, as I showed so far, most paints on this without having to buy dedicated material.
All right, and then for the question is it better to use water-soluble printing inks?
So I think that might be the difference between what I have at home, which is not water soluble, and this, which is. So I don't think that plate likes water soluble things as much. But again, it's on your preference. If you liked the sort of like grainy film texture almost of that, and you have a commercial plate and you have water soluble inks, sure, but I would say don't go out and buy anything in particular to do this until you play around and see what you like. But yes, I would say that I think my inks at home are oil-based. So, all right, let's talk about the plants. So this is nature prints. So I wanted to show you what you could do with plants. You can use anything that is two-dimensional or roughly two-dimensional on either of these plates. The results will be a little different, but they are pretty close to each other. So leaves work really well because they are mostly two-dimensional, and you can get some great texture out of them from the veins on the underside. So I just have an assortment of leaves from houseplants or some plants outside. Another thing is that you can use dried leaves. I took those out already. But if you're using dried leaves, I would say wrap them in a paper towel with some water first to rehydrate them, because you don't want them breaking all over your plate. There they are, they're on the bottom. So these are just, leaves from last year that I moistened, and they're flexible now. So yeah, you can use dried leaves, just hydrate them so they don't shatter all over your piece. If you're in Pittsburgh today, it's raining. So if you go outside after this and you're in the region, then of course you can pick any leaf that is dead on the ground and it will work because it is super hydrated right now. So what you don't want to use on these is anything that is sharp enough to break the plate. So especially, I would say this plate is a little like skin. So if you think you could, cut yourself on the object, if you accidentally scraped past it, it could probably damage this plate. So like a rose thorn or a branch off of a tree are definite no's for the plate. I don't know the tolerance of the commercial plate. I would guess it's probably not too different. So you don't want something that would pierce it. And especially since that plate is not reusable, if you want to experiment with sharp stuff, definitely don't use the commercial plate, because you have to buy a whole new one if you pierce it. This, again, you can remelt. So if there's something that's like verging on the edge of sharpness, like if you wanted to take some sort of pine branch and make it more 2D, then maybe you could make that work. You might get little holes in it if you're pressing it a certain way, but you could always remelt this down. Or you can use fake plants if you wanted to use something that has sharp edges. Yeah, so the other thing I would say is that sometimes you'll find, because the stems are going to be a little thicker, they can get in the way a little more. So I have not tried this ivy yet, so I don't know if it will get in the way, but I was using a different type, philodendron leaf the other day, which was twice as thick as this, and I could not get it to print enough. So you might have to cut the whole way to the base of the leaf if the stem does not work. And I can show you what those look like. Are there any questions about plants? And again, you can use any 2D material. So as someone said in the chat, you can use fake plants. If we get there, we'll demonstrate yarn, because yarn gives you a neat texture. You can use other pieces of paper if you want. Anything, as long as it's flat enough that when you push down, it'll go into the surface of this enough that you can get an impression. I'm just going to quickly now show you some of my examples. And I sort of went through a 3-part process to figure out what I really liked about different things. So these first ones are all ones with ink. I was trying to do it the right way. They're a combination of ink and paint. There's paint in the background. I was making everything very thick as I put it on. So these ones are not quite as I would like them. And again, if you like this, that's fine. Like this, if you want to try and get to this place because you like this effect, you can do whatever you want. That's the part of this being a process-based medium, is that if you find an effect you really like, stick with it and make that the thing you do. I did not love this. There is a lot of texture. Hopefully that translates on camera. But I did not love like the texture right here that's showing up. And here's what I mean by the base of the leaf was too thick, so I could not get a good enough outline of the leaf. On all of the leaves I did using this plant, they all came out kind of chunky for what I wanted. I wanted to get it very close to the branch. And there's just another one of like this process. So these ones are a little more fine-tuned, sort of started to get into some sort of jam. This one is one of my first really good impressions of the bottom side. This one's a little more splotchy, but I kind of liked it. This one was using really liquidy ink. I tried using 2 different colors there, and another really liquidy, but kind of interesting, almost cellular looking leaf. So then these are the ones that I really liked. And I have a lot more examples, so don't be like, oh, he only did 12 and got these really nice prints. I have probably 50 different pulls that I did before I got ones that I really started to like, or more. But yeah, so these are starting to really get like the veins of the leaf. And like, I'll show you how to do this multi-layer technique, but you know, some of the different details and outlines of the leaf. This one has a lot of the structure of the leaf on it. And this is that first photo I really liked of the other set. I tried it again and got this really nice one. All right, so I will try and walk you through getting a good print of a leaf. And I'm going to try one of the ones I haven't tried, which is this ivy, and I'm going to trim the stem because I don't want that to interfere with the print. So yes, I'm going to use, these are the student grade paints that we have. Like I said, this brand is nice and runny. So if you wanted a background to your piece, if you wanted everything to be one color, I would say print that first. And sort of the color order you want to go in is from light to dark. So you'd want to start out with your yellows, any color that adds white, like a light orange or a pink, or like a light green or blue. You want to put those first. There's obviously still some black on this brayer, which is going to add to the effect, hopefully. Yeah, and then you want to go like your true colors, which are the colors without whites, and then your dark colors like browns and blacks last, if you want those colors. All right, so you want to put the veiny, the bottom side of the leaf down, and you might have to play around to get it to lay in a way you like. Yeah, so that's that. Oh, the paper, I did not talk about the paper. So you can pretty much use any paper. This is just slightly thicker printer paper. So if you're using copy paper, like really, really thin printer paper, that probably would not work the best. I've pulled with those and it just falls apart because it's liquid on paper. But I pulled, with nicer paper. This is all printer paper that I pulled these with. So this is a little bit of a nicer painting paper, but for the most part, you can use any paper. You can even use fabric if you want to play around with fabric. I would just say buy a fabric medium, which will make the paint more watery, so it could add to any thick paints that you have. But yeah, just make sure you're using a medium if you're using it on fabric, because acrylic paint doesn't stay on fabric well when you wash it, if you're using it for like clothing or something. If you're making a wall hanging that you don't plan on washing, you can just use acrylic right on that. So there are tools you can use to do this, to smooth it out, especially if your hands are all messy. But if you don't care about the back of the sheet being nice, or if you think you can get away with it without making a mess, do it. Uh-oh. All right, so that was not liquidy enough for this. So I will have to spray this and add some more paint. So again, these aren't the paints I was using So it really is about playing around to find what works for you and what you have. But I will do this again and add some water. Hopefully.
Hi, Mike. We do have a question in chat. The question is, can you run the brayer over the paper instead of hands?
Yes, if you have a clean one. That is another way you can do it if you have a second brayer, or if you don't mind the back of your paper getting messy, then yeah, you can run the brayer right over it. I'm just trying to get some of the excess paint off. Yeah, so there's still a lot of texture in this paint, but I'm going to pull it like this, just to show you what would happen. And here, I will show you the texture right now. So you could fix that by just continually pulling a little bit of the paint off till you have exactly what you want. I'm just going to use the same sheet of paper. Yeah, so if you wanted to, and again, this is going to make the back of your sheet messy, but if you don't care about that, if you're just doing this to play around with, then yes, the brayer is a good way to do this. All right, so you'll get a print like this. And I didn't preface before I pulled this print, but I will now. There are going to be a couple different types of print you're going to get. And this is what you're going to like layer to create some of the effects that I had. So the first print you're going to get is one like this, which just has a blank space where the plant was. And then, so there's still a lot of ink on your plate. If you just want that color of what's under the plant, I would say pull a second print with what is around it. So I'm just going to do this again. This one doesn't have to be nice if you don't want to use this second one. I've done this a lot just to get rid of the excess paint. And I'll have a sheet that's just dedicated to pulling up the second coats. So I actually like this one better than the first one. So I might end up using this to show you some of the layering instead of this one. And one of the cool things is that if you're doing this with multiple colors, you can clean them after everyone, but you can also leave them on the plate. And the plate will, this will probably stay on here for a couple more prints. So if I put another color over it, I will potentially get some of this red from those prints. So I'm now going to lift this up. Because it was so thick, there is still a lot of ink, and this one's not going to be a super clean one like some of the other ones I got. I'm actually going to I will show you how to line this up here in the last few minutes if you want to get something that's cleaner and more linear or structured. Yeah, so that's just an example what that could look like. Again, I don't love it, but there is a third type of, and I'm just going to, with what's left on there, just pull. This is on the back sheet of a different page that I used. All right, so again, second print's a little more what I was going for. Still not perfect. Again, different inks or paints that you're using will do different things. So play around with the effects. So this is this, but there's one more print that you can get, and that's going to be from the back of your leaf. So there are two different ways you can do this. You can either, stamp it right on and push paper down, or something that I was experimenting with that did give me some of the prints that I made. Let's use, I'm gonna use this yellow. All right, so I'm gonna put the leaf face up. And we're gonna take another piece of paper. As you can see, we didn't get exactly what we wanted from the top here, but I still think this turned out as a cool effect. Very mustard and ketchup though. So this would be the point where your leaf's going to be a little wet. You want to take it off as delicately as possible if you plan on reusing it. And you'll have another imprint of a leaf underneath. It actually looks like maybe the top of the ivy will give a more interesting print than the bottom. So I'm actually going to use one of these black sheets that we did the ink with and see what happens. So yeah, this is why a second brayer is handy, because the other thing is when you're doing this, you're not going to be able to put this on a table. You'll have to put it on a rack to dry. Otherwise, it'll stick to whatever you put underneath it. Yeah, so I actually really like that. With all the prints I showed you, I just cut it down, but there is another way to do this. And I did set this up so I could demonstrate this. So if you take just a little bit of blue tape, make sure that your plate is on a piece of paper or something that it won't move. Center it where you want it. If you want, you can measure things out to make them exact. But otherwise, just put a piece of tape on a piece of paper that you want to print with. And I have a piece on both sides here so I could show you some layering of doing both. And I could choose, again, to clean my plate or leave it messy. I think I want to leave it messy. I have a piece of paper here on each side. I am going to first, we're going to use some of these more craft paints. So you do want to think about your colors a bit here, because if you don't know your color wheel, you can make brown very easily if you're not, when you're not intending to, or make more muted colors, which is fine. And with this process, it is a little harder, especially when things are dry, because you are making layers, but you do want to like think carefully, because if I were to make an orange, which is yellow and red, and put this blue on top, it would just be brown, which is not the color I'm going for. So like if I were to use this roller, which is probably not what I should do because of that, yeah, I would get colors I don't. But because this is dry on the plate, it shouldn't affect it too much. I'm going to show you a palette knife. Yeah, see, there's a little bit of wet paint somewhere, or it gave us a bit of a brown. I'm going to just avoid that spot and leave it how it is. So this way I don't accidentally spread it around more than I would like. Okay, so that is my surface. I'm just going to pull a couple different leaves that I have here. Also, with like a big leaf like this, feel free to break it up and play around. I was using on some of those examples just like the tiny upper portion of the leaf to get some cool prints.
We do have a question in chat, Mike. The question is, how easy is it to clean once the plate has dried paint on it?
They're both pretty easy. The commercial plate, you can just, use soap and water. Again, this plate gets kind of slippery when it gets wet. Use some light soap and water. You don't want to scrub too hard just so you don't break anything, but otherwise it's not hard to clean. I have definitely been that artist that lets everything dry and comes back to it the next day. And this is not like a paintbrush where if you don't clean it, it's going to take hours to clean. And so this comes off pretty easily after letting it sit overnight or so. So my computer's on that page. So I'm just going to show you. This has a bubble. I'll show you what I mean. But yeah, so this wiggled a little bit and there was a space here. So it's probably not going to be as centered as I was hoping it would be, but hopefully you still get the gist of what I'm trying to do, which is make a nice centered piece. And I wasn't intending to have this as a nice print, but I did pick up some of that other color, so this might be something to play around with. Okay, so I actually put this one over a previous print, just because I also want to show you some of the multi-layered processes that you could do. But this one's pretty dry. This is one of the leaf ones I really like the two-tone of. So I use that for this. So I would, probably do, maybe I'll try with the next color doing that as the foreground for that one. All right, so and you're not going to be in love with every single one you do, and that's okay. Yeah, that did not at all turn out how I expected. I'll show you when they're finished or what they look like. Yeah, really surprised is what's happening right now. So we're going to go back to this one. So yeah, that is more like what I've been trying to get. All right, because I did want to use two colors to sort of demonstrate how you can get these lined up better. Last layer. Again, I had some problem with these stems. Just gonna tear that. That's fine if it's slightly off the page. So now I want to do the reverse. So try and make sure everything is level and you're pulling the page tight when you do this if you're trying to get a perfectly even print. And again, I'll show you after I pull this second one what these all turned out like. But that one did register exactly. This one will probably be slightly off because I did not pull this one as tight the first time. Okay. Going to try and pull one more, maybe two more here with these two. All right. And maybe had a little too much noise on it, but there are some interesting things happening. I'm going to do this one more time. Yeah, this page, as you can see, is not the best paper. Again, this is like the thinnest copy paper you can buy. So this is probably the worst paper that you can use. One of these turned out better than the other. So see, this one's slightly off the registration right here. Otherwise, if you're trying to get something that is right in the center, that would be how you do it. And that is the other one. This one turned out a little more how I wanted. Yeah, this is okay. So I'm going to see what happens. Could ruin this completely, but that's fine. Sometimes you have to explore art to get what you really want. Yep, that turned into a muddy mess, but that's part of the process. Is sometimes things don't turn out how you want. Sometimes you get some really cool prints, and things do change a little bit as they're drying. So even this one I said I don't like as much, even as it's drying a little bit, has some more textures that I actually kind of really like about it. Yeah, that's all I've got. Oh yes, if you want to stick around, I can show you all pulling the one with the string and what happens. So we're gonna use one of these slightly better colors and just spray it down a bit. I'm just gonna use the ruler that already is messy. So if you were just doing like a base mono print and you were just doing it for like a field of color, you could easily combine two colors. I didn't get into quite doing this, but this is, one way that you could do it. I could also pull any regular print just like this. And it will give you some multicolor effects. This is where you really don't want to combine colors that don't go together when they're still wet like this. I hopefully not move this around too much. If you wanted like tight lines of the string, you could tape them down on the ends. If you wanted to do this exact thing, which is like cover the whole thing with the string. But I want some of the unevenness, so I'm just gonna let it go where it goes. Oh, nope, nope, nope. Yeah, you know what? We're just gonna let that be. All right. Okay. I might have to do a second one. We'll see if the texture. Yeah, so that is what the top side of one of them looks like. It is another way to, add some design to the background. You could then do a leaf over this if you wanted. I'm going to use this junk paper real quick. Pull up some of that excess. Actually, that's the excess. I kind of like this more because there's some of the background noise. Actually going to pull. We're going to do another excess over all the ones I like here. I mean, the one that I didn't like after the third pull. Sometimes just adding more things could make some interesting things happen. That did not. Still a mess. Now, going to lift the string up. That is what yarn can do. I don't know if you can see the texture there, but there is the texture from the yarn there, right there. I really like yarn. This is one of my other favorite things to play with this so far. But yeah, like yarn can give you some really interesting effects. But this was a nature print workshop, so I did want to focus mostly on playing around with leaves and the texture of leaves. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for all of your questions. This is a really fun workshop. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email us at creative.pit.edu.